I'll never forget the moment my phone lit up and my life divided into a before and an after. It was a Tuesday, gray and wet in that way the sky gets when it can't decide between rain and fog. I'd come home earlier than usual, set my keys in the dish by the door, started a pot of coffee I didn't really want. My phone, nearly dead, buzzed once with a text from an unknown number. No words, just an image. I swiped it open without thinking, and there she was, my wife, half-turned, caught between a hug and a kiss in a parking lot I recognized from the strip mall near the freeway. The man was blurred by motion, but not enough to mistake the hand on her hip or the casual closeness of two people who had done this before. It wasn't a staged photo. It was real, accidental, intimate, the kind of candid that only happens when the guard is completely down. I felt my chest tighten like the first second after a car crash. The airbag of adrenaline deploying inside me, a bitter powder of disbelief and certainty spreading into every part of my body. I stood there, coffee machine hissing behind me, the house quiet in the way a house gets when it's waiting for someone to speak truth into it. I told myself what people always tell themselves in that first minute. Maybe it's old, maybe it's a cousin, maybe it's a prank, maybe it's anything except what it looks like. But something deeper, older than words, simply said no. It said, look at her hand, where she puts it. Look at her chin, how it tips. Look at the posture of someone who thinks she's safe. I stared until the screen dimmed and I saw my reflection layered over them like a ghost in the glass. The next morning, she wandered into the kitchen with sleep-mussed hair and one of my hoodies draped over her shoulders. The hood strings in a careless, not the way she always tied them. She kissed the top of my head, poured coffee, teased me about forgetting to buy filters, laughed when the news anchor mispronounced a senator's name. Ordinary, familiar, but something in me had tilted in the night, and the world rolled with it. I watched the way she placed her phone face down on the counter, the way she checked it even when it hadn't buzzed, the way her smile thinned for a split second before she threw it at me like a lifeline. "You good?" she asked, and the answer caught in my throat like a fish bone. I wasn't good. I was inventorying my life. You don't think of it that way until you have to. How two people accumulate a world together. Inside jokes, dented pans, a plant you keep promising to repot, a receipt from the first road trip that keeps surfacing in couch cushions. I walked through the house like it was a museum of us, trying to decide which exhibits were true and which were fakes. Her leather sketchbook on the table with ring-shaped coffee stains and little arrows pointing to color palettes. The hoodie she loved to steal. The picture of us in Joshua Tree, wind ripping her hair across her face while I squinted into sun. I touched each thing like it could tell me where it had been last night and who had looked at it besides me. I didn't confront her. Not then. Not the next day or the one after. I started doing the things you tell yourself you're above, checking our phone plan usage at lunch, noticing how her routes home changed on the location history she didn't know I still had access to, memorizing the number that flashed on her screen when she left the phone on the bed and went to wash her face. I told myself I needed proof for honesty's sake, as if the truth were a courtroom that would be kinder if I presented exhibits alphabetized and stapled, with the staples all perfectly flat. The number belonged to a man named Evan. He had one of those curated lives that look effortless from 10 feet away. His Instagram was a collage of moody black and white street photos. His bio a mess of quotation marks and city tags. In one picture, taken by a mirror, the corner caught a sliver of someone else. Just an elbow and a ring I knew as well as my own palm. In another, a coffee cup with the same chipped nail polish I'd teased her about 2 days earlier. "I like the chips," she'd said, wiggling her fingers. "Keeps me honest." Honest. The word sat in my mouth like metal. I followed her once, the way you follow a storm on the radar, tracking the dot as it drifted across the map and settling one street over with the engine off. I watched her walk up a set of concrete steps to a worn blue door and knock like she knew how many beats it took for him to arrive. When he did, she smiled with a kind of relief that had nothing to do with me. He reached for her and she folded into him like a habit. I didn't take a picture. I didn't need to. I drove home with my hands clenched so tight on the wheel that my knuckles hurt for 2 days. You imagine the confrontation 100 times. In some versions, it's cinematic. Voices raised, glasses shattering, truths carved into the air with the sharp edge of anger. In others, it's clinical, surgical. You present the evidence like a doctor bringing scans into a room, pointing at the bright blooming where a dark place should be. Mine was neither dramatic nor clean. It was tired. It was two people who hadn't been sleeping, sitting on a couch that had felt like a boat for years, rocking gently in the currents of everything we'd ignored. "Who is he?" I asked. I didn't show her the text right away. Didn't say his name. "Please don't lie to me." For a moment, I watched her face rearrange itself. Bright confusion, quick fear, a calculation so fast I might have missed it if I didn't know what to look for. She went still. "I don't. Please," I said, and my voice cracked on the word the way it does when you ask the universe for breath. I showed her the image from the unknown number, the one in the parking lot. It's strange, the things you notice in a picture of your own undoing. The dent in the Corolla 2 cars over, the way her scarf had come loose against the wind, the little tilt of her head that meant she was laughing. Her mouth opened, then closed. "Where did you get that?" she whispered. "Does it matter?" I asked, and I watched the relief vanish from her eyes. She took a breath, and when she exhaled it sounded like the last air leaving a room. "It's not what you think," she said, and then heard herself and flinched. "I mean, it started as, God, I don't know how it started. He liked my work. He asked questions no one asks. I felt seen. I felt not alone. Not alone." I looked at the couch. We had made it here together one Christmas day, laughing while we tried to fit it through the door frame, the neighbors helping, my palm pressed to her back while we shifted and carried and set it down. Loneliness is possible in any room, even a room full of furniture built by love. I thought about the months I'd worked late, about all the times I'd said, "Hold on, I just have to finish this," and then never closed the laptop. I thought about her standing in the doorway with a story in her eyes and me nodding without hearing the words. "I needed you," she said, and the words weren't a weapon. They were a diagnosis, and we both knew it. "I was here," I said, and it was true in the way a house is true even when no one comes home to it. She cried then, not the kind of crying that asks for comfort, but the kind that empties a person out. I didn't move. Some part of me thought that if I held her, I would dissolve into the idea that we could rewind. Some part of me thought if I didn't, I would calcify into a person I didn't recognize. The quiet between us grew teeth. "Do you want me to leave?" she asked, and the question floated in the air like a balloon filled with something heavier than helium. "Yes," I said, because I didn't know what else to say. Her keys rang small on the table. She packed a bag without closing the drawers all the way, as if the house would hold its breath until she returned to finish. At the door, she turned like someone leaving a hospital room, uncertain of the etiquette of departure. "I'm sorry," she said, in the voice people use when the apology is a raft too small for two. After she left, the house introduced itself to me again. The bedroom was a box with a bed in it, sheets twisted like a thought you can't get straight. The kitchen was a series of tasks. Clean a plate, throw away a lime that had turned to paper in the fruit bowl, find the lid to a container that never had one. The living room had her mug from that morning, a ring of coffee near the handle like a fingerprint. I walked into each room and stood in it until the air thinned. Numbness came like snow, quiet, covering everything, making the world look softer from a distance. It wasn't merciful. It was simply the body's way of not breaking right away. I went to work. I answered emails. I said, "Good, you?" to a cashier. I watered the plant she'd named Juniper and discovered had been plastic all along. It felt right somehow that I'd been careful with something that couldn't die. People know before you tell them. My friend Jake looked at me one morning and said, "You sleeping?" And I said, "Like a rock that's fallen down a well." And he didn't laugh. My mother called and asked about the weather, and I told her too many details about the forecast until she stopped and said my name the way she did when I was 8 and had scraped my knees on the sidewalk. "Is she okay?" she asked, and what I didn't say was that the definition of okay had shifted and I did not know where it had landed. She texted the third night. I saw the banner appear and disappear on my locked screen like a tide touching the shore and slipping away. "Can we talk?" 3 words without punctuation. I let them sit. An hour later, "I'm at my sister's. I'm safe. I'm sorry." That word again. I typed and erased and typed again and sent nothing. There is a kind of power you mistake for healing when you refuse to respond. I learned quickly that silence is not the same as peace. On the 5th day, I opened the photos folder I had named Truth. It contained too much and not enough: screenshots of call logs, a blurry picture of the blue door on his porch, the parking lot image. I scrolled until I reached the end, and then I set the phone on the table and looked at the wall. Walls aren't neutral. They remember what they've held. The thermostat clicked and the air sprang to life, and I cried for the first time in a way that scared me. A sound I didn't recognize coming out of my chest. A pressure like I had swallowed a river and it was trying to find its way out. I called a therapist. I left a voicemail that sounded like a stranger had borrowed my voice and was describing a movie in which a man loses his wife to a version of himself he didn't know how to be. She called back and offered 2 appointments, Monday or Thursday at 3. And I picked Monday because it was closer and I didn't trust myself to last until Thursday without filling the time with something that would make everything worse. The office had a diffuser that smelled like lemon and a bookshelf with titles that suggested redemption was possible in 6 steps if the lighting was good. "Tell me what happened," she said, and I told her the parts one could. "When did you know?" she asked, and I smiled without humor. "Knowing's not one moment," I said. "It's 1,000 small ones that line up and point their little fingers all at once." We talked about grief as if someone had died, and in a way someone had, the version of me who believed what I believed. We talked about anger like it was a storm I kept trying to outrun even as I was standing in the middle of it getting soaked. "It's okay to be 2 things at once," she said. "Sad and mad, loving and done." I wrote that down in a notebook, the first page of a book I didn't want to write, and it helped enough to move me from morning to afternoon. She and I met once, at a cafe where the ceiling fans made the napkins shiver. She looked smaller. Somehow contrition can shrink a person. She said she'd told him it was over. She said she'd started with the truth when she called her sister because she didn't know how to keep talking around it without running out of words. She said she wanted to try therapy together. She said she didn't sleep and she didn't eat and she didn't know how to be in a body that had done what it did. I sat across from her and heard everything as if we were underwater and the sound had to travel farther to arrive. "I can't be married to a story I don't believe," I said finally, and her face crumpled in a way that made some ancient instinct in me move to comfort her. I didn't. Love is stubborn, but self-respect is stubborn too, and if you're lucky they learn to share a room. Mine were fighting in the hallway, their voices slipping under the door. There were practicalities, there always are. We had a lease, not a mortgage. We had 5 plants, 2 of them real. We had a cat whose actual name was Winston but whom we called Fork for reasons that made sense only to us. We had streaming logins and a shared grocery list and the kind of entwined habits that feel like security until they feel like a trap. We divided what could be divided and left what couldn't for later. I met Evan exactly once. Not by design. He came into the hardware store on a Saturday because that is how the universe writes scenes when it is bored of subtlety. He stood at the paint counter with a swatch book and said he wanted a white that wasn't cold. A white that knew about sunlight. I kept my mouth shut until he turned and I saw him see me and we both knew. He looked surprised but not ashamed, which was a new insult I didn't know where to put. He started and I held up a hand. "Don't apologize to me here," I said. "Don't apologize to me anywhere. Just stay away from her." He nodded like a penitent schoolboy in a movie and I almost laughed at the absurdity. He left with a gallon of eggshell and I stood there holding a stir stick like it was a weapon. I moved into the spare room before I moved out altogether. The first night in there, I lay on a mattress that used to host out-of-town friends and listened to the house speak to me in its new accent. Pipes clicked, traffic hummed, a neighbor laughed on a balcony, and I realized how long it had been since I'd been alone with my own noise. It wasn't friendly at first. It was crowded with what-ifs and if-onlys and a running reel of every moment I could have chosen differently. I wanted to go back in time and change the way I worked late, the jokes I missed, the dinners I declined, and it took weeks to understand that revision is not a superpower humans get. I signed a lease on a small apartment with a fire escape that faced a brick wall so close I could read the old painted phone number for a locksmith half-peeled by rain. It smelled like dust and hope. I bought a couch with my own hands and carried it up 3 flights, swearing and laughing and sweating in the way that makes you feel like maybe you can make a life out of nothing if you just keep moving. I slept on the floor 2 nights because the bed delivery was late, and I woke to the sound of morning trucks and realized I had not dreamt of her for the first time in months. Grief is boring, mostly. People imagine it's symphonic, loud and bright. Really, it's a man washing the same 2 bowls in a sink every night and leaving them to dry and realizing in the morning that he did not put them away because there was no one to impress. It's a grocery list that says bread, coffee, apples, and then stops because the person who used to add the yogurt brand is not here to spell it for you. It's a message from a number you still haven't saved that says, "How are you?" and means, "Do you still hate me?" And you reply, "I don't know," and mean, "I don't know who I am in this new map." I wrote letters I didn't send. In one, I told her about a sparrow that got trapped in the grocery store and the way the manager propped open the automatic doors until it found its way out. In another, I told her I had started running very slowly, in the mornings when the air was a little less heavy, and how my lungs felt like they were being sanded from the inside but in a good way. In the last one, I wrote "I forgive you" and stared at the sentence for an hour and then crossed it out because it was premature and I didn't want to lie on paper. I kept them in a drawer with the lease and the spare keys, important things I didn't know when I would need. Time did what it does. It moved and took me with it whether I wanted to go or not. Winter edged in, and the city switched to the colors it wears when it wants to be quiet. I bought a heavier coat. I learned which deli made the good soup. I said no to dates friends attempted to set me up on until saying no felt like a habit I should interrogate. I started reading at night again. A book at a time, slowly, under a cheap lamp that warmed the wall to honey. I put on music while I cooked even though I was bad at both and danced badly between the stove and the sink because why not? I kept the floor clean, which turned out to be something like church for a person like me. We met again, months later, because divorce is a series of meetings with people who don't know your history beyond what's written in a file. She'd cut her hair. I noticed the ring-shaped callus at the base of my finger had softened. We sat side by side in plastic chairs outside a mediating office and I felt something unhook inside me. A tether I hadn't realized I was still holding in my fist. She glanced at my hand and then away, and for the first time I understood that we were not enemies. We were just 2 people who had reached the end of a road and were learning where to put our feet next. "I'm seeing someone," she said, not as a knife but as a fact. I nodded, surprised at how little it hurt. "I hope he knows who you are," I said, and she smiled in a way that made me think maybe she did finally. "I hope you know who you are," she said back, and I realized I almost did. I kept the cat. It wasn't a fight. "He likes you more," she said, and it was true, even though we both pretended to be offended when Fork chose one lap over the other. He slept on my chest that first night in the new place, heavy with trust. His purr sewing new seams where old ones had split. I signed the final document on a Tuesday, the day coming full circle like a dark joke that made me grin. On the way home, it started to rain, and I walked without a hood because sometimes you let the sky wash you on purpose. People want a lesson. Maybe you do, listening to this, waiting for me to say the sentence that makes it worth the time you've spent here. I don't have a moral to hand you like a mint at the end of a meal, but I know this. Love is not proof against loneliness. Attention is not the same as devotion, and if you're lucky, pain will carve you into a shape that can hold a different kind of joy. I learned that forgiveness is less a gift you present with a bow and more a practice, like stretching a muscle you forgot you had. Some mornings I could do it. Some mornings I did not try. Both were okay. Months later, an unknown number texted me a photo. For a second, my body responded like a fire alarm. Then I opened it. It was the cat, sitting in a patch of sun on a rug I didn't recognize. His eyes half closed, a little king enthroned. "He looks happy," the message said, and it was her, and I typed, "He is," and then, without ceremony, "I hope you are too." She responded with a heart, and I smiled because we had found a small language that did not require either of us to be anyone else. On a Sunday in spring, I turned off my alarm and woke up anyway because my body had become its own clock. I brewed coffee and carried the mug to the fire escape. The brick wall was still close, but it had softened in memory into something like a companion. On the ledge, a weed had pushed out from a crack and flowered into a yellow thing that had no business being alive there. I looked at it until the steam from my mug stopped and the air warmed and the city started talking to itself again. I took out my phone, scrolled past the folder named Truth, and opened the camera. I snapped a picture of that stubborn little flower and wrote a caption I didn't post. Look what grows in the margins. Later that afternoon, I found the parking lot from that first photo. I'd been avoiding it without admitting it to myself. I parked and sat with the engine off and watched the everyday choreography of people living. Shopping carts rattling, a kid begging for a candy bar, a woman helping an older man into a car, a teenager taking a picture of her shoes for reasons that made sense only to her. I got out and walked to the exact spot where my life had once felt like it ended. It didn't feel like an ending anymore. It felt like a place where a version of me had learned something he didn't want to and survived. On the way home, I stopped at a bookstore. I bought a used copy of a novel with a stranger's name in the front. Between pages, a torn receipt from a diner marked the place someone had left off. I slid it back in where I found it and decided I would leave my own marker when I was done, so the book could carry both of us forward without needing to explain. At the register, the clerk said, "Do you want a bag?" And I said no because I wanted to carry it out in the open like a promise. That night, I cooked pasta and oversalted it and ate it anyway. I washed the pot and set it upside down to dry, and for a second I heard her laugh in the memory that lived in the ceiling. I didn't shut it out. I let it play until it ended. I dried my hands. I went to the desk and opened a new document and typed the first sentence of the story you've just heard. Because sometimes the only way through your life is to narrate it to yourself until you can hear your own voice again. When I finished, I closed the laptop and stood by the window with the city laid out like a circuit board, little lights humming. I thought about the man I had been and the man I was becoming. The distance between them, not a straight road but a tangle of turns and dead ends and little paths that doubled back to where I'd started. I thought about the next person I might love and how I would tell her the truth about the way I sometimes disappear into my head and how I keep a plant alive now and how I still don't know what to do with my hands when I'm nervous but I am learning to put them palm up and wait. Before bed, I took my phone and opened the folder named Truth one last time. I selected everything inside it. My thumb hovered. I thought about the weight of proof, the way it had steadied me and then held me down. I pressed delete. The phone asked if I was sure because phones are designed by people who know we often aren't. I tapped yes. The screen brightened for a second and then returned me to a place where the folder did not exist. I slept, not like a rock dropped down a well, but like a person. In the morning, the alarm chimed and I didn't need it. I stretched, felt the small hurts of a body that had started moving again, and smiled at the ridiculousness of being alive. I made coffee. The filter folded in on itself and I fixed it with my finger, and when the machine hissed I thought about rain on a Tuesday and the sound of a door closing and a door opening and the difference between the two. If you were sitting across from me right now, and you asked what I would say to the person I was in that kitchen with the picture on my phone and the coffee burning, I'd tell him to breathe. I'd tell him to choose himself sooner. I'd tell him he's not foolish for believing what he believed and not weak for hurting the way he did. I'd tell him that love is not a guarantee and betrayal is not the end of language. I'd tell him he'll laugh again. Real, ugly, bright. And not just at a joke but at something that feels like sunlight on the inside of his ribs. I'd tell him he will learn the names of new streets and new ways to hold a morning. And that one day he will stand in a kitchen he built and pour coffee into a mug and it will not taste like loss. It will just taste like coffee. Later that week, I ran into Jake outside a bodega, and he looked at me in that quick appraisal friends do and said, "You look different." I shrugged. "I'm sleeping," I said. "I'm eating cereal like it's a religion." He laughed. "That'll do it." We stood on the sidewalk and made small talk about nothing that matters and everything that keeps you here. A game, a movie, a bar that closed, a place that opened. He clapped my shoulder, the old shorthand for "I love you, you idiot," and I went home. On my table sits a list now, not of groceries or bills, but of small things I have found to be true. I add to it when I remember. Today it says, "Plants need light and so do you. Buy the good coffee if you can. Run until the world quiets. Call your mother back. Tell the truth before it curdles. Keep a spare set of sheets. Take a picture of the flower that shouldn't grow there and send it to no one. Forgive what you can so you don't have to carry it up 3 flights of stairs." The list is longer than it used to be. I think that means I am, too. And sometimes, when the rain kicks up against the window just right, I still think about that first photo. Not with heat anymore, not with shame. Just as a marker on a map. You are here, it says. You were there. You went this way. You made it. I rinse my cup, tilt it in the dish rack so it drains, and turn out the light. Fork jumps to the windowsill and watches the street like he's expecting company. I tell him we're okay. He flicks an ear and pretends not to listen. In the dark, the room breathes, and so do I. There is no music swelling, no epiphany in neon. Just a man and a cat and a city settling itself for sleep. Just the sound of the radiator ticking like a distant metronome. Just the quiet knowledge that when morning comes, I'll wake, and there will be coffee, and the day will be exactly what it is, and that will be enough.